Suppose you screeve or go cheap jack or fake the broads or fig a nag or thimble rig or nap a yak or pitch a snide or smash a rag. Suppose you duff or nose and lag or get your straight and land the pot. How do you melt the multi-swag? Booze and the blowins cop the lot. Suppose you try different tack and on the square you flash your flag. At a penny lining make your whack or with the mummers mump and gag. For nix, the dibs you grab at any graft, no matter what. Your merry goblins soon stravag. Booze and the blowins cop the lot. It's up the spout and Charlie wag with the wipes and tickers and whatnot until the squeezer grabs your scrag. Booze and the blowins cop the lot.
We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings from Tbilisi, Georgia. This is the Anadromist, and I'm Byrne Power. And welcome to the first of two parts of our February Q&A. And I must say, you had very good questions for me this time, and as you did last time. And the problem is, it takes me too long to answer your questions. They're too good. They're not yes and no questions. They're not... in New York City, we used to say, just give me answers. And someone would go like, 1976, the Yankees blew. Three random answers. Anyway, so what I've decided to do is break these into two parts. The first part will be questions related to the arts, to music, and to David Lynch, the filmmaker. And in part two, we'll deal with more philosophical, spiritual kinds of issues, including things related to community and technology and the relationship between community and technology. And do demons exist? These and other questions for part two. Meanwhile, let's get started with the questions. But first, I need to tell you this. One thing I've been meaning to talk with you about, but haven't recently, is I need help building this channel up a bit. And the reason for that is simply this. By the end of the year, I have to find a way to bring my library from Alaska to Georgia, which is going to be a Herculean effort to do so. I have literally over 10,000 pounds of library in Alaska waiting to come here. And it might be sufficiently more than that. This isn't going to just happen spontaneously. I don't at the moment have the resources to do it. I might do a crowdfunding epic later in the year, but at the moment I just want to encourage you to subscribe to the channel. That would be a very good thing to do. Simply to subscribe. That doesn't cost anything. Like it. That's helpful to just so that people see people like it. Share it. Share this channel with your friends. That would be a wonderful thing to do because I need to build up a better subscriber base so I can take advantage of some of the things that I could get from YouTube if I get over 1,000 subscribers. Because time-wise, I'm doing great because I have such long videos. I have thousands and thousands of hours, but I just don't have that many subscribers to the channel yet. So maybe you can help with that. And if you want to go one step beyond that, then I would like to encourage you to go through PayPal to become a supporter. And you can do this in the following way. Two ways, actually. One way is to simply give a lump sum of money that you feel, whatever you might feel willing to contribute. The other is to become a monthly subscriber, and monthly subscribers who subscribe over $10 a month, $10 or more a month, and who have, or people with a one-time or multiple donations that equal up to $50, will get more things sent to them in the mail. Now, if you pay less, if you subscribe on a lesser amount, I will still send you some stuff. But if you want to really take advantage of all the other stuff that will be coming down the road, then I would suggest becoming a monthly subscriber. Now, I'm going to give you a list right here of some of the topics that people have already received behind the paywall, so to speak. So if you see something, if you're already a paid subscriber and would like to, and you see something here you didn't get, leave a message below and I'll make sure I send it to you. And make sure that you're looking for it. I probably sent it to you, but you might have missed it because it ended up from WeTransfer into your junk mail. So do check that. Anyway, enough of that. Basically, I'm saying I could use all the help I could get. I have enough money to live here in Tbilisi. I do not have enough yet to get my stuff here. And you will see a change in quality of this show once my stuff gets here from Alaska. Anyway, that's a Herculean job for much later in the year, but time to start thinking about it. And I'd like to encourage you to help out in any way you see fit. Okay, Jack Grant says he's got a question about music. He says, in one of your videos you mentioned that you appreciate someone's ingenuity with a particular instrument, but you're more interested in the meaning of the song. I understand this sentiment, but I believe that the instruments and particular melodies in a song can add depth of meaning that we really don't understand. To give an example, I listened to O Fortuna, that's from Carmina Burana, and looking up the lyrics online, I said to myself, okay, so if these lyrics were to be put into some banal radio rock song or even rap song, wouldn't the song be much less a work of art? It's the same lyrics, sure, but I believe something very deep is missing, and people don't seem to want to discuss what that perhaps is. He's got another question, but let me deal with this. Well, I probably didn't make myself very clear. When I say to listen, that music has a meaning, I'm not talking simply about the lyrics. I am talking about the actual tones of music used. For instance, I can listen to a modern pop song and within a few bars know that it was overproduced by the sound alone. So my feeling is this: you are absolutely right. There is much more to music than the lyrics. And in fact, what makes O Fortuna and the Carmina Burana so amazing is that it's actually based on medieval lyrics, and it was evidently a group of monks who decided to kind of just live devil may care, throw their morality to the wind. So O Fortuna, the way Karl Orff orchestrates it, gives it this gravitas of fatalism. And that's what makes his piece so powerful. It's a very fatalistic work, and you sense that, but it's almost like I will fight against God. I will fight against morality. We will just live, eat, drink, and be merry, and we're going to die. So, and yeah, that same sentiment could be put into a heavy metal song or a punk song or a rap song. With different lyrics, I would believe. But still, the point is this: the music itself and the setting of it is not at all neutral. So if you heard me saying it's just the lyrics of a song, I didn't communicate correctly. I believe the music itself has a meaning, and there are bad musical meanings. That is to say, I think certain chord progressions, not that the chords are wrong, but that they lead to sappy tunes, and sappy tune sentimentality is a real problem. So, we'll leave that there. Another question. Sorry, can't help myself here. No problem. If you only answer one, oh, how nice. He's giving me a choice, but I'm going to persist. I also remember you saying in a previous video that rock music had essentially run its course in terms of creating some massive mainstream fad. I believe this myself as well, but it also seems that music in general is no longer capable of being the cultural driving force it once was. Everywhere you look, it is so fragmented from all the decades of subcultures. Do you think that art could take its place? Or is it more so that music and art need to be combined together, that the music musicians and artists create can't abide by the rules and orthodoxies of any one genre? Well, there's a lot actually going on here. The first part of it, up to the point where you say there are all these fragmented subcultures, is exactly the point I came to back in 1995 about. After Kurt Cobain shot himself, I realized that's it. That's pretty much the end of the rock music story, and of much of the 20th century of movements like jazz, starting with ragtime, going to jazz, and even places like country music, that what had won in the end was commercialism. And that seems to have been proved true. There is still good music being made, don't get me wrong. However, the fact is that music is no longer a driving force, and I cannot see it becoming a driving force anytime soon. It will eventually have meaning, but the 20th century was unique in that regard. Now, do you think art can take its place? Well, not art as it is now, that's for sure. Not contemporary postmodern art or whatever it is at the moment. Post-appropriationism, politically correct art and all that. No, absolutely not. It's just the emperor's new clothes. Nevertheless, I have been looking to see what arts I think will be important to the 20th century. And guess what the answer I came up with is? If you've looked around any of my videos, you will eventually see that I've already come up with that answer. And the answer is puppetry. And guess what puppetry does? It combines music, it combines art, it combines acting, it combines engineering, it combines fashion, all into one ball, and most people don't know much about it. And what I've discovered doing puppetry, especially not just doing children's puppetry, is when I perform things for certainly in America, people have no idea what I'm doing. They like it, but they've never seen anything like it before. And that means puppetry is onto something. That is to say that puppetry has room to grow. Whereas if I do the same in music, everybody's heard all sorts of stuff. I mean, I really haven't heard much that I would consider new since the end of the 90s. I mean, all the dubstep and various forms of EDM and the different kinds of things have all been rejumbled versions of stuff that had all been hashed out in different genres in the 20th century. However, I must take exception with what you say about genres, the orthodoxies of genres and the rules. I love great genre music. I don't want to see all blues end up as being, just throw the rules out the window. I don't want to see country music, well, what's happened to it is it's just become country pop rock. It's pointless. And people who go back to the rules are great. Now, there are also people who know how to break the rules by continuing the rules. So, for instance, there's what I would call folk punk. Folk punk started back with the Pogues, went on to groups like the Ukrainians, Gogol, Bordello, and such. And what it does is it takes punk rock and the aesthetics of punk rock and mixes it with folk music, real traditional folk music, and pushes everything forward. That's great. I love that. What I don't like is the commercialized versions of everything. There was an Irish group I heard recently. I don't remember their name offhand. I could look it up. But that was doing traditional music in a really new way. That I like. But the point is, in order to extend forms, you have to be within the form. And and one of the problems that so much new pop music has is it's tried to be outside of all forms and simply be pop music, whatever that is. Or in other words, commercial music. So we'll leave that question there. Hope that helped. And now the next question is from El Ronan Nato. What do you make of the phrase that Jonathan Peugeot says in an interview with Kurt Jaimungal? You don't make art, you use art to make things. And this is from an interview, a good, long, healthy interview, which I will put a link to right there. And you should go listen to it. It's an excellent interview with Jonathan Peugeot about art and the difference between traditional arts and modern and then postmodern and contemporary art. And I highly recommend listening to it. In a way, what Jonathan Peugeot is doing here is referring to something that Hans Rookmaaker discussed back in the 1970s when he was trying to find a way to pull apart the difference between modern and contemporary art and the art of the past. And he has a great book called Modern Art and the Death of a Culture, which I highly recommend. It's a little dated now since he died in 1976 and the book came out in 1970, and things have happened since then, but not much, I think, that would have surprised Rookmaaker. Also, I think the works of Jacques Ellul are quite relevant at this point because of the nature of the artist in a technological society, and I recommend his book, The Empire of Nonsense, which is a tough read, especially if you're an artist, but a really good one. So, because of my pretty deep influence by Rookmaaker and Ellul, among others, I have been thinking about these subjects for quite a while, and I came up with kind of a scheme about the difference between traditional art as it has been globally in pretty much every culture. There may have been some exceptions, but basically every culture up until the advent of the modern age. And the modern age, for me, well, there's a hint of it that begins with people in the art world, with people like Leonardo and Michelangelo, but really it kind of gets kicked off around the time of Goya. Goya, I would say, is perhaps the first really modern artist, particularly his Capriccios, I believe they're called. The sketches he did, which are really, really dark. They're pretty amazing work. But it's in modern art, which then goes into Impressionism, and also in the 19th century, particularly in France and the countries around France, you have the idea of the bohemian, living a different sort of bohemian life. You start getting this new idea of art as self-expression. You can see this in music with someone like Beethoven. The problem with art as self-expression is that it kind of falls into, there's this belief in the genius. Rookmaaker has a short essay about the genius and how the genius is really a modern concept. And it's the idea that some people have this almost divine ray upon them and it emanates out from them. The classic genius person is usually considered to be Mozart, because he started playing piano so young, couldn't stop composing. Sometimes Picasso is thrown in here. Every waking moment he was sculpting something, he was making something. If he was sitting at a restaurant and a cafe in Paris, he'd be scribbling, doodling while he was talking. And certainly there are indeed people who have this facility of work. But interestingly enough, Mozart's work isn't really about self-expression in the way that, say, Beethoven's was. He hadn't crossed that boundary. Being incredibly gifted doesn't mean you have a special way of living that makes you different than other people. But anyway, this notion of self-expression began to take hold of art. And unfortunately, all of us couldn't be Mozarts and Picassos. So the art began to be seen more and more. Interestingly enough, they kind of went back and forth between the more clinically observed styles of art and the more expressive styles of art. So actually, I mean, we often look at Impressionism as being like we tend to look at it as an expressive style. It wasn't. It was the very name is Impressionism. The idea was you just took what the light hit the way the light hit your eyes, and you tried to get that on canvas, without really thinking too much of the objects that were there. That is to say, trying to clinically mold them. Like right now, I'm looking out a window here in Tbilisi, Georgia, and now I could say, okay, I'm going to try to draw these houses. They're kind of ramshackle with slanting roofs. There's a bit of a construction project going on behind me. I could try to draw this. Oh, but you know what's in the way? There's a window I'm looking through with smudge marks from where I badly or found some sort of what I thought was window cleaner. It was labeled as window cleaner, but leaves all sorts of streaks on the window. So the Impressionist wouldn't try to paint those buildings out there. They would paint the impression. And the impression would include looking through those streaks. And that's why you get that sort of thing. Later you have Expressionism. That is more the expression of the self-looking. So, who is it? Van Gogh. You see that, or shall we say Van Gogh, if you want to be Dutch. That's probably as close as I could get. But anyway, Van Gogh, his work is tremendously, revelatory of his inner emotional states as he is painting. He's still using some sense of the Impressionist idea, but now he's moved it inside of himself so that the feelings of the lens, so to speak, matter more than the camera. Whereas with the Impressionists, it was the camera, it was the lens that was important. And you go back and forth with different movements. Abstract expressionism is about, Jackson Pollock's explosion onto the canvas, or, there was action painting at the time, that sort of thing. But then minimalism is cool and detached. And pop art is fairly cool and detached. So you have these different styles. But the thing is, when you do self-expression, what it ends up becoming for us is just, as Tarkovsky says, any act of the will. And so after a while, the things I've seen personally in the art world as acts of self-expression, utterly pointless. They don't serve as art. Art, I think, has to add to the beauty of life. And I think it has to be... it is about having some sort of skill. It isn't simply having a concept. Now, of course, people say, no, but I'm a conceptual artist. I mean, I really remember walking into a New York gallery one day. The gallery was completely empty. I looked around. I was actually there to get some work of art, but I looked around. It was rare to see a gallery completely empty. And I looked around, and then I looked at the gallery worker behind the desk, and I said, this is the exhibit, isn't it? And he goes, yeah. It was nothing there, but that was the exhibit. You don't need any skill for that, and not much even in your mind. But I think the idea of these really valuable objects that we call art, I think the problem, and this is what Rookmaaker points out over and over, the problem is capital A art. It's the commodity. It's the prophetic work that capital A art is. Capital A art is the work of the genius. Capital A art is, it's more important than life. And I think that is a problem. I think that's what Jonathan Michaud is reacting to, is capital A art, which is sometimes capital A anti-art. Marcel Duchamp's Upside Down Urinal is anti-art. A lot of Dada is anti-art. Certainly a lot of postmodern art is anti-art. Someone pretending to be a child doing finger painting as their abstract expressionist work is anti-art. And we've gotten to the point where now people, it's just like, they'll say, you just put anything together and people say it's art. And then there'll be people who go like, oh yes, it's art. Meanwhile, who really wants to go see that stuff? I mean, it's for a cult, really. I think the artist, one thing I've noticed in Georgia since I've been here is how the art follows certain lines. There's the artist Pirosmani here. Then there's Lado Gudiashvili and Elena Aklavadiani. I probably said that wrong. Aklavadiani. Yeah, well, close enough. For a non-Georgian, they would know who I was talking about. And then and there's other artists, but they share certain features. They're in a tradition. Now, there are contemporary artists here, and they're just as pointless as anywhere else. But I'm often looking for art here, and I've purchased just a couple of pieces that I found at the Dry Bridge huge flea market that are, to me, is just like, this is unique to Georgia, this kind of thing. The tradition here comes out of several sources. One, it comes from Orthodox iconography, which is basically flat and not, it's not trompe l'oeil. It's not trying to deceive the eye with a kind of realism. It's not influenced as much by the Renaissance here. Two, it comes from sign painting, believe it or not. This guy, Pirosmani, was this like poor sign painter, and yet he's probably the most well-known Georgian artist and affects everyone else who comes after him one way or another. Also, there are traditional motifs of things like the grapevine goes back maybe 8,000 years here, and the grapevine shows up in their architecture. That is to say, the curly patterns. This shows up all the time. So they had a real affinity with Art Nouveau, say. And I've done one video on the architecture in the area called Sololaki. So for me, art has to be, it has to be from a root. I mean, and if you're in America or if you're in England and you've been doing contemporary art, I would suggest looking into your own traditions, because contemporary art is kind of a dead end. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't come from anywhere. It's just whatever is happening inside. It is very much, and this is the point of Jacques Ellul's book, The Empire of Nonsense, basically purely technological. It is for people who live in technology. It is no antidote to the problems of technology. It is one more curse from technology. Because so much of contemporary art is someone getting a clever idea and working it out, not trying to bring beauty and meaning to the world, as Tarkovsky says the artist must do. And Tarkovsky's idea that the artist is a servant is extremely important. And I've also come up with this other scheme about how traditional art used to have three elements. And on the top element, we could call it art or meaning, the artistic element. On one side, we could call it the function or the decor in the old sense of the word, not meaning household decor, but meaning the fittingness of the thing. And on the other side of the triangle is its ability to communicate, or what we might call its entertaining function. And so those three things, if you go to someone like Bach, the artist, or if you go to someone like any Renaissance artist or any Dutch artist from the 17th century, you're going to find all of those elements together. They have a function, they have meaning, and they have a place to be. Well, that's the function too. But they also they communicate. They communicate to us still today. So, but I've spent a lot more time, and I will spend more time dealing with that particular scheme. But that should do it for that subject right now. But I have more artistic questions. So the next question is from a friend of mine, Clint Brill, whom I met at L'Abri a couple of years back. And he was there kind of looking for L'Abri as he thought it was in the 1980s, as it really was in the 1970s. And which doesn't exist anymore because time passes and things change. So Clint asks the following. He says, the things of this earth are only temporary. That would include the arts. The human soul is eternal. The gospel has eternal consequences. What is of most valuable, the arts or the gospel? To which I would first of all reply, it's a false dichotomy. That is to say, it's not like, oh, art or gospel. Should I preach the gospel or should I do art? Well, first of all, you shouldn't preach the gospel unless you know how. And that's not something you're going to just like wake up one morning and know. In other words, should you share the gospel with people? Should you share the message of Christ? Well, yes, but in this day and age, you're going to really have to learn a new language to do so. Because if you walk up to someone and say something like, Christ died for your sins, you might as well be just speaking another language to them if the person is at all influenced by contemporary values. Because this person is going to look at you like, I can't believe they're not even going to hear you. So that's one whole issue by itself. But right here, there's this idea that one has to make a choice in life between, working with art versus working with Christian things. And of course, this question is primarily for Christians. And here's the point. And Rookmaaker, and I'm going to include, in fact, let me do that right now. I'm going to include a clip of Hans Rookmaaker discussing these things, right?
Oh, yes, I see him before me, the nice little guy, the French artist coming from France, was sent by a Belgian Bible college. This man had been an accomplished artist, and he came to me and he said, may I interview you? We have many questions. I want to lie him down. I said, okay, go ahead. First question, is there any need in the Christian life for art? Second question, what do we do with modern art? And it just went on. They were the most silly questions you can imagine, posed in the most fantastically stupid way. I posed them much more intelligently than it were done by him. And I got so angry, and I said, now what are you doing? You are an evangelist. You're asking, has art any meaning for Christian life? Just as a little insight, at that little Bible college, they had done something fantastic. Great! Almost as great as Westminster Seminary inviting me. They had installed a course on Christianity and art. Have you heard about a Bible college having a course on Christianity and art? That's very fine. Now, the problem came that the whole course was about A, what is this relationship? Is there any relationship? And B, and that was the most basic question, why do we have this course? And that's why they sent that little man to me. And I got so mad. I said, now you refuse to answer that question. You think it's silly to discuss that question even. But don't you understand, it's the most basic question to ask if you are in a Bible college in order to become an evangelist. Because the next thing you're doing is to have a big Bible campaign, you have a big tent, and what you play into that is music. And you send out pamphlets. It's all art. But just because you refuse always ever to think about it, what you're doing is so third class and bad. And it does communicate that you don't care. And if you don't care, who is caring to listen to you because you have a message of no care?
Okay, so that's Hans Rookmaaker's scorched earth policy on people asking that question, because he got it even more in the 70s and 60s than people do now. At that point, he was one of the very few, if not at some points, the only very intelligent Christian. He was a Dutch art historian in the 1960s and 70s, and one of the very few intelligent people who understood the Christian's relationship to art. And constantly there were people who were saying like, well, we don't have time for this. Meanwhile, they made Christian junk propaganda. And who needs that? Nobody. So I think that the best answer to this question is that Christians need to have an artistic way of doing everything. Why should we produce junk? It was actually Frank Schaeffer in 1977. I saw him talking with his father and mother in Oakland, California at a seminar for the Whatever Happened to the Human Race series it was like a preview of the series, really. And he points out that, there's just too much of this essentially Christian kitsch, Christian stuff made just for the Christian ghetto. And Rookmaaker really points out how we make, like, church architecture these days absolutely frightening. There's some new Scandinavian designs that really creep me out. They're very postmodern. They have no windows. They're just like, it's nice that they have a wooden texture. I'll show you a picture of one here. Nice that they have a wooden texture, but it's this very strange environment that doesn't seem to relate to the lives we live. And the real question is, how do you make something that reflects one's faith and at the same time has quality? And I would say this is a very difficult thing. Now, I'm not going to discuss the quality issue here. All I would say is it's a false dichotomy. There is you can do art and you can do the gospel. What you shouldn't do is propaganda either way. It has to be honest. And that means the art has to be beautiful. It has to be well made, but it also has to be meaningful. It has to not simply be there to give a message. It has to have some purpose. And don't get me started. Dmitry Terek asked me the following question. What do I think of David Lynch? That's a really, really big question. Maybe sometime I will make an entire video on the subject. And I do think about David Lynch. About, 4 years ago, I spent one winter going through everything that was then available by David Lynch. And that included all his movies, it included documentaries, it included all of the Twin Peaks series, and this was before they had a new series. So, which I haven't watched yet. I'm waiting to do that, and he's got a new, very short film that just came out featuring a monkey and such. But I consider David Lynch to be extremely important, both as a director and as someone who has influenced my own, not my thinking so much as my visual outlook on things. Not that anything I've ever done, not exactly directly relates to David Lynch. But I first saw Eraserhead, his very first film, not as soon as it came out, but a year or so after, as a midnight movie. And now I was a Christian by that time, but I had been reading, I had decided, and this was before I went to L'Abri, but I had decided I needed to understand a bit more of why films were changing and what that meant. And actually, this was after I went to L'Abri. There was a period when I came back, and I took a few friends on my second viewing to go see it with me. These were Christian friends. One of them said to me, "Jeepers, I'm not going to have any nightmares after watching that film. We just sat through the nightmare," which is actually a very astute observation. Eraserhead, perhaps more than any of his other films, is a dream. I often think that what David Lynch discovered, maybe someday in the future we will share our dreams through some electronic process. Oh, what a nightmare that will be. I've often figured that what people would do was purposely give their children bad lives to give them good dreams, and you can see all this abuse and exploitation taking place. But in a way, it's like David Lynch took a camera, stuck it up to his head and just filmed the contents of a nightmare. Eraserhead is a very powerful film. It's in black and white, which is why I'm in black and white right now. And it is potent, filled with images. Now, at that time, I had begun to understand something about decay and the aesthetics of decay, which that film is soaked in. I'm not going to go on too much. I mean, I could spend the next hour talking about David Lynch films, and I'm not going to do it right now, but let me just say this. His next film, Elephant Man, is my all-time favorite of his, and it's in probably my top 3 or 4 films of all time. And in many ways, it's the least David Lynchian film, because it deals with something that actually happened in history. He only did that twice. The other time was with The Straight Story, about a man riding a lawnmower to see his ailing brother, an old man. A very interesting film. But I found The Elephant Man to be a very, very deep film. And it's one of the few films that regularly breaks me to tears. And I think part of it is because I myself, I was very well aware of the Elephant Man movie before I saw it. And, the Elephant Man story before I saw it. There was also a Broadway play out at the time, which did the cheating method of not having the person wear any makeup to play the Elephant Man. I saw a version with David Bowie live on stage when I got to New York doing the Elephant Man. But the Elephant Man to me was just a very deeply felt piece of work. And it is, in some sense, his most spiritual work. Now, David Lynch is a transcendental meditator. He makes a lot out of this these days. He does all sorts of supporting and promoting of transcendental meditation. What's ironic to me is you rarely feel any of this in his films, and I don't even think you feel it very much in The Elephant Man. Anything like that. Maybe at the teensy bit at the very end with the ghost of the mother talking. But generally his films like Blue Velvet, really? Meditation? Twin Peaks, Fire Walk With Me, really? Lost Highway, really? Transcendental meditation? I think what it is David Lynch is just such an artist that his in a sense, his ideology doesn't interfere with his art very much. I think more recently there have been more hints of his what he actually believes, which is something I don't agree with. That is to say, I'm not interested in that sort of meditational process of focusing within, trying to eliminate all of the illusion to come to the core of everything. Your Central Eastern idea. I'm not a big fan of that idea as an explanation for what the world is. But I don't let that doesn't get in the way of my appreciation for David Lynch, because it doesn't show up in his work. This is like this with other artists too, that, they're just honest. And now David Lynch is honest, and he's also a bit of a trickster because he doesn't really let you know what he's thinking. However, I think he sees a world where innocence is absolutely corrupted by decadence and evil and hypocrisy. But he longs for the innocence. And sometimes when you see interviews with him, he's kind of like an extremely seedy postmodern version of Jimmy Stewart. It's very strange. Anyway, I'm going to let that sit there right now. That has inspired me to think about perhaps doing something at some point down the road about David Lynch. So thanks, Dimitri. By the way, you've got another question further down the list here that I'm going to get to near the end. Okay, one more set of questions by... two questions, they seem somewhat related, by Brian Crowley. We perceive what interests us, and what interests us is what we act upon. Memory increases potential action by enriching perception with experience already acquired. What effect, if any, does the consumption of media have on memory? How distorted can perception become if it's shrouded in synthetic memories, recollections, not of embodied action, but of artificial recreations of action? How diminished is our capacity to act if our perceptions are distorted this way? So, and then he gives a example of his own memories and the Call of Duty games that he had played. And I'll get to the second question, which is almost a part two. And Brian, I have dealt with this. You've probably gotten there, but in the last of the Time series, I think I deal with this a bit. That we have to... the problem with... Okay, what does he mean by artificial memories? Well, my real memory of Tbilisi is I go on the ground and I see... there's trash on the ground. I see people, though, kids playing in the street. There's all these sensations that come with walking through the streets here. Those are my real memories of Tbilisi. If I don't know much about Tbilisi, or if I just, for instance, some people make these videos here. It's interesting how much they make the same video over and over. Different people, travel wanderers, nomadic, social media nomads out there, and they always do the same stuff here because they don't know the city. So they do the things they're told to go see. And they're also replacing our memories so that when we come here, we say, oh, that's what's in this town. But what I've learned is that that's not what's in any place. It's not anybody. One of the big problems is if you look at a photo of somebody, like for instance, my mother died a couple of years ago. Now, I have to see her in my mind as a memory. One of the temptations is to see photographs of her in my mind. And you can think of this to yourself. Think of a person that you know. Now think of the way they look. Are you looking at a photograph? That is not how they look. That is to say, that's a photograph. And you have to be willing to, and occasionally I will find these images coming. The images aren't bad, but you have to be able to distinguish it. You have to practice at seeing the real person, which is a skill that takes time to learn. But I believe our engagement with reality suffers as a result of the fact that we have often replaced our memories of things with illusions. So, now that isn't to say that those artificial memories are all bad or anything. It's just simply to say you have to be able to say to yourself, that's not the thing. So, for instance, I've never been to Ireland. Everything I know about Ireland comes from looking at books, watching movies, and such. And the way in which I know Ireland the best, well, I know Irish music quite well. And the way I know Ireland the best is that I talk to people who are Irish. I've talked to quite a few Irish people in my life. So whatever those images of green hills and fields and, the pastoral stuff is, it's just like people are saying, yeah, there was heroin in Ireland. Yeah, Ireland was really poor in the 80s. Now it's not. Ireland's gone from being a very conservative country to a more liberal country in both the good and bad sense of the term. So it's like saying, like, when I get to Ireland, if I would like to get there someday because I find Ireland an interesting country, I'm going to have all of my images contradicted because the reality is always different. That's the problem with online dating. People present themselves a certain way. And yet, that isn't really the person. And you have to realize that immediately going into it. You have to kind of read between the lines. And to wonder what this person looks like at a different angle. To wonder why the person, it's just like it used to be, it was a cliche in... kind of classified ads where women will always write likes long walks on the beach. That's nothing. Well, if all women like long walks on the beach, you don't have to write that because it's nothing. It's just like, okay, great, we'll go for a walk on the beach. It actually means something else when a person writes that. But of course, that's just an illusion as well, because the person's presenting themselves a certain way. So I would say that the point is to learn to put the real in your mind. If I want to really remember my mother, sometimes what I have to do is go to the worst moment, which is when I watched her die. I remember that moment. Oh, that just scrubs everything else out. Because there were no photos of that, obviously. But that's in my mind. But that also opens the key to more of the door back into the real past. At least the past as it might have, really closer to what it was. Now, but the photographs, however, can, particularly if they're photographs you've taken, I've learned to take photographs so that I can actually remember. That is to say, I say to myself, how do I want to remember this person? So whenever I take a photo, I think of that. How do I want to remember this situation, this person? I don't think of things being like, I don't like smiley, goofy photos of people. That's not how I want to remember them. I want to remember them with a bit more, what shall we say, a bit more dignity than that. And finally, here's another question from Brian. I think the feeling that we are not what we ought to be and the desire for some kind of realization is inherent in our experience. Granting this, my question is about the democratization of media. With the awareness that we are represented in the eyes of men is the danger that we seek realization in colonizing the way in which they see us. In other words, in creating a presentation of ourself which isn't ourself, and not allowing them to see us as they see us, but trying to show us ourselves. To be courageous, or to be seen as courageous, to be thought of as humble while maintaining our pride. These are natural stumbling blocks of our desire for realization. With the democratization of media, our best selves now can be realized and he put best selves in quotes, can now be realized in the eyes of a mass audience. Do you have any thoughts on this? And yes, I do. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that it used to be the only people who would get, say, on television or get to be in a movie were people who were of the few. And so, therefore, people were always presented in a certain fictional aspect. They had to wear a certain kind of clothing, particularly with early television resolution. They had to wear a certain kind of clothing that didn't create feedback in the visuals, no houndstooth suits and such like this. So, I think the problem is, again, and I think about this here, one of the things I think about when I'm doing this is like, now how do I present me? Knowing I can't actually present me, but without presenting a false me. Now, one thing you may have noticed in these two videos is my presentation of myself is all over the map. That is to say, almost every question is answered kind of differently in different settings. And that's partly because I am not one person in the same setting all the time. People, when you're watching people who are always sitting in the same room and such on their videos, it's amazing how much light they've got to have on them. This is not a natural thing to have all this light streaming on them. I don't care about presenting myself as I look under my best circumstances. I have all sorts of little physical imperfections and such. Who cares? So the point is, since we do have this media spreading everywhere, and I can get evidently people from all over the world watching this thing, what I need to be aware of is not to present the false image. What you see here should be what you see when you see me on the streets here. That is to say, you should run into the same person. And I tried to make Byrne the same Byrne, whether he's at church or whether he's here or whether he's in a university or setting teaching, or whether I'm in with a group of extremely wild punk rockers in New York City. It's always Byrne. That is to say, I may dress up a little better for church. I may obviously, if it's a special occasion, you might want to put on better clothes and this sort of thing. But I don't go out of my way to present different Byrnes to the world. So I don't do it here either. And that's one way I have of keeping it real. And you should realize this isn't me. This is just an image of me. you're looking at a screen. I'm talking into a camera. Let's just break that fourth wall and let you know, hello, you're just a screen, and don't get, someone recently contacted me. Her name will not go I won't tell you who she is, but she said, I'm your, I'm a fangirl. To which I said, no, just don't be a fan person of me. I don't want fans. I want just real people. And of course, she was kind of joking, and I appreciate the sentiment behind it. But again, in my thinking, the word fan etymologically is short for fanatic, still carries that connotation. Just be a friend. Try to be a friend. And if it's a long distance friend that it's kind of like, pen pals through the video, fine. So we'll leave the question there and go on to the next one. Which conveniently brings us to the next question by Freddie from Kenya. And it's a Rookmaaker question, and I have obviously shared before and will share again until a few people understand how important Rookmaaker is. He says, "Hey Byrne, how do you find reality? I love the Rookmaaker video you suggested a while ago, and the title of that is What is Reality? I'll put a link to it down below. And he says, the facts plus meaning bit really got me thinking. Anywho, Happy New Year and God bless. So, how do I define reality? Well, the point of the whole Rookmaaker lecture is we don't have the definition at the moment. It eludes us. The reality eludes us. And it's deep. But I highly suggest listening to What is Reality. Rookmaaker, basically, the question is the point of the video. Because we have on one hand, we have this kind of scientific, materialist vision of reality, where everything has to be answered within the scope of what we can weigh and measure. Then on the other hand, we have just kind of an almost superstitious religious mentality, which just goes by faith, disconnected from any sort of sense of rationality and logic, or using proof text and straw folk to argue against these people. But Rookmaaker is saying, but here's the problem. In your weighing and measuring of everything, you really can't find what it means to be human at all. You can't find the nature of reality through your weighing and measuring. Can't find truth. Can't find meaning through weighing and measuring. So, then what about all the stuff that appears before our eyes? Our human relationships, the way the water affects us when we're walking along a beach or on a boat and looking out on it. What about the way dogs make us feel, or what about how do these things evoke emotion? Well, what Rookmaaker basically says is, if this is our answer, and the problem is this is what we're tempted to answer if we're scientifically based, that it's just this stuff that we can weigh and measure. And he really gets crazy about it, and he hits the table and makes a loud bang. He goes they have this solid reality.
And I think that is the thought that we really have to develop if we want to win. Because otherwise we cannot but lose, because inevitably modern science, being very strong, having this reality, undeniable reality, is hard. You get with your head against this reality, is going to win. So please, Ruinsta, it's not the results of modern science that we have plastics and these electric equipments. These are results. But the methods and principles of modern science, this reductionist view, this thinking that only the things that you can see and weigh and measure are real. That's why in this world, Bultmann says, in this world of aeroplanes and vacuum cleaners and radios, the Bible's miracles are not true. It is just throwing away your brains. It's a sacrificium intellectuum. It is a sacrifice of your intellect. And I'm saying, I'm sorry, Mr. Byrne, it's a sacrifice of your intellect if you don't understand that if you're a Jew and you are so happy, you stand in awe for aeroplanes and vacuum cleaners and radios, and you think that the world is reduced to these things, and there is nothing more.
And what do you have? You have these like emotions and stuff, and yet everyone from all different cultures from the past had all of these other things that were on this side. And he says, basically, to answer that question, what he says is we have to come up with an answer to that question, which he says that he doesn't have the answer because what do? Do you throw out science? Or do you throw out all of your human emotional reactions and instincts, which tell you something very different? And what I've come to see over the years, now Rookmaaker defines reality, I think. He says at one point, I used to think it was fact plus meaning. But more and more I've learned to say it's just meaning. So in other words, Rookmaaker is saying it's meaningful. Now, in that lecture, What is Reality?, Rookmaaker references. In fact, I should do this sometime. I should get permission from his daughter to go ahead and really parse out that discussion of his on what is reality, because I think it remains extraordinarily meaningful, as I think it's going to remain so for quite a while. And not enough people have listened to it. But the point is that reality, he would say, like I said, well, let me go back. Okay. So it's fact plus meaning, but then he pulls out the fact. Why? He says facts, are basically scientific theories. And if we get new evidence, we change the facts. So, and he says, like, that's a little tough to build things on. So it's the question of meaning. What produces meaning in the world? Not that you should, get rid of all the science and stuff, but you have to find a way. I hate the word harmonizing science and religion and that sort of idea, but rather that find the truth that holds them both together. And interestingly enough, Jacques Ellul talked about reality and truth in a very different kind of a way. Jacques Ellul talks about reality as being the things we see, we weigh, we touch. And in other words, reality for him was all the stuff. Being French, he thought it was all this stuff, this material world. But truth was over here in a separate category from reality. So that it wasn't just if you had the reality, you had the truth, which sometimes it sounds like Rookmaaker is saying, but I don't think he's being that simple either. But here's the way it works, is there's all the things that happen. That's the reality. It's hard to encompass the reality. But to understand it, you need the truth. You have to have truth to understand reality. If you don't understand reality. So, truth, and this is, I think, what prompted me to go back and find the meaning of time. Because I saw that, it's all this stuff over here that's in question. And this other stuff, like some people use the word reality as just like, you got to face reality. I'm sure good materialist would say this. And reality is just hard nuts and bolts stuff. You can almost see the film noir guy. It's just like, I had to finally face the truth, the reality of the situation. Whereas, in fact, in order to understand it, you need some other thing. And that other thing is already there. In a sense, I've used this difference, and I get this from Jacques Ellul, between space and time, between the visual and the aural. The aural is all over here in time, and the visual is over here in space. Now, I'm pulling them apart. They're not really apart. But the point is, science has pulled them apart already. So we have to take the stuff from this side to put it back. So, to understand reality, we need truth. To understand truth, we have to live in time. I made a series of 10 videos on that subject, so I think we'll stop there. Next. Dragan Vujanovic, did I say that right? Asked me a simple but very difficult question. Why settle in Georgia and not elsewhere? Which is an excellent question. And the answer, to put it briefly, I may eventually do an entire video about these things. And for some more of my clues, go over to Georgian Crossroads, which you've obviously, by what you mentioned right after that, obviously you discovered my Georgian Crossroads channel, which if you haven't, go look for it. I have a lot of other things there. But I haven't described exactly why. When I was answering the questions about community, I mentioned that intellectual conversation can be had in Georgia. One of the things I like about Georgia is that coming out of the post-Soviet world, it then entered into a state of chaos, including civil wars, poverty, electrical shortages, corruption, a type of revolution, the Rose Revolution, 5-day war with Russia, all of which ended about 2008. And so it's only been the last 10 years that Georgia has kind of been free to breathe as a new entity in the post-Soviet sphere, which means it missed all of the 20th century because it was locked directly inside the Soviet Union. As far as all the cultural developments in the West, it missed getting a direct hit from any of them. So it didn't get punk rock, it didn't get disco, it didn't get the hippie world. It got a mild form of jazz, and now there's a lot of EDM, electronic dance music here, and it's not that interesting to me. But what I like is the fact that when I discuss things with people, the postmodern ideologies have not really hit these people. So they take things seriously. And, when I explain to them what's actually going on in the West, even the most leftish, trendy type of person here is suddenly horrified because they didn't understand that the depth of the erasure of the past, the meaning. What's happened is, it's like you don't find geeks here. That is to say, you don't find, and by geeks I mean those people who live for their special nerdy game or franchise, entertainment. You don't find those people here. I'm sure there's a few somewhere, but basically, when people go to a movie here, like even if they go to a Star Wars or Marvel movie, when they walk out, they either go like, "Oh, that was a good movie," or "Oh, that wasn't." They don't go think about how they would redesign the Spider-Man costume. It's like they don't think about the kinds of in-depth things of rewriting everything, of fan fiction, of all of this stuff. They don't do that. What they do instead is, like, I've had more discussions here about the Russian filmmaker Tarkovsky than I had in the last year than I've had in my entire life in America. Think about that. And it's not just simply because, this used to be part of the Soviet Union. They actually don't like Russia. They don't mind Russians. Many of them speak Russian, but they don't like the thing above us, in the north, and the system of it. But nevertheless, they will admit Tarkovsky is a great filmmaker. And I've hardly ever run into anyone who would say anything other than that. And in fact, I meet a 22-year-old girl here. She knows who Tarkovsky is. She likes Tarkovsky. She's watched his films. She has favorites among his films. Try to find that in America, really, seriously. Now maybe in Western Europe, it's a little better than that, but probably not a whole lot better. And I'm using Tarkovsky because Tarkovsky is a symbol of serious art. He's not a symbol of, genre fiction. Even though you could say Solaris and Stalker are both kind of science fiction films. Much in the same way you can say that Dostoevsky is crime fiction. But oh no, it's really art. And not art in the pretentious sense, but art in the real sense. Art that does something for you, that gets into your soul. So that's one big reason why I'm here. What attracted me, I think, originally was the music and dance, the older music and the older styles of dance here, which is why I find the electronic dance music here Georgians sometimes seem to like music indiscriminately. They like it all, and they don't necessarily know how to parse out the commercial from the non-commercial. And so, I'm not saying Georgians are perfect in their relationship with these things. However, if you get Georgians like singing together, it's an amazing thing to behold. Other things, of course, what's nice here is there are mountains. I like mountains, and there's snow in the mountains. I'm actually going tomorrow to go touch some of that snow because I'm desperate for it, because we haven't had any here in Tbilisi. But generally, I would say I like Georgians, and it's an interesting time in their society, and I think I might have something that I can help them with, and I have many things to learn from them. So it's a double back and forth. So that's the short explanation, Dragan, for why I am here. Well, thanks for spending time so far with me on the February questions and answers. Now, I am actually honored that you bothered to ask me questions, and I hope in my life I've learned enough to have something to say that's worthwhile. As an old Chinese pastor used to say, it's my job to feed you fish, it's your job to spit out the bones. So do that for me, will you? Coming up in the next session in a couple of days, we will have part 2 of the Q&A, and that'll deal with other issues, philosophical issues related to community and technology and media and the existence of a spiritual world. Come back for that. See you soon. This is Byrne asking you to live the Anadromous life, to swim against the stream. As they say in Georgia, droebit means see you in a while, temporarily, is what it really means. It just means temporarily, but it means like, I'll see you in a while.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.